That first jump was supposed to change everything. It did, but not in the way anyone had expected. The ISS Titanborn, humanity's first battleship equipped with a wormhole-core drive, hovered in the void just beyond the orbit of Neptune. Its dark hull gleamed under the distant sunlight, a behemoth of steel and energy, prepared to carve open the universe itself. On board, thousands of crew members braced for the historic moment, excitement crackling through the air like static before a storm. Admiral Kane stood on the bridge, staring at the swirling energy field forming at the ship's core. He had spent decades dreaming of this day, of seeing humanity break the shackles of traditional space travel and leap beyond the limits of known physics. The scientists had assured him it was safe. The engineers had double-checked every system. Yet deep in his gut, something felt wrong. Final checks complete. A voice reported from the control station. Wormhole core is stable. All systems green. Ready to initiate the jump on your command. Kane exhaled slowly, gripping the armrest of his command chair. All right, let's make history. Initiate the jump. A pulse of energy rippled through the ship. The air seemed to thicken, humming with an unnatural vibration. Then, without warning, space itself cracked open. A blinding rift tore through reality ahead of them. A swirling mass of impossible colors, shifting and writhing like a living thing. The Titanborn surged forward, its massive engines firing as it was pulled into the wormhole. For a single frozen moment, it felt like everything stopped. No sound, no motion, no time, just the abyss, yawning wide. Then, screaming. Not from the crew, not from the ship, but from the void itself. The bridge flickered with chaos as alarms blared. Crew members clutched their heads, eyes wide in terror. Some fell to their knees, gasping for breath as if unseen hands were squeezing the air from their lungs. The rift around them pulsed, stretching unnaturally, as if someone, was watching from the other side. And then, just as quickly as it had begun, the ship re-emerged into normal space. The bridge lights steadied, the vibrations ceased, and the stars returned. But something was wrong. The system they had jumped to was empty. A dead void where a bustling star system should have been. The navigation officer's voice trembled. "Sir, we're not where we were supposed to be." Kane's hands clenched into fists. "Confirm coordinates." A long silence. Then, "Sir, I don't think these coordinates exist." The crew exchanged uneasy glances. Space travel had its risks, but navigational errors this extreme were unheard of. Kane turned to the view screen, his gut twisting. If this wasn't their intended destination, then where were they? Then the sensors picked up something. A distortion. A tear in space, like the one they had just left. But this one wasn't closing. It was widening. And something was coming through. Something vast. Something wrong. And it had noticed them. The bridge was silent, the weight of the unknown pressing down on everyone. Kane felt it like a thick fog, tightening around his chest. The distortion ahead of them pulsed, a jagged wound in the fabric of reality, its edges shifting like torn silk in the wind. But there was no wind out here, only the cold, unfeeling abyss of space, and something was moving within it. The sensors flickered, struggling to get a clear reading. "Sir, I don't know what I'm looking at," the officer at the scanning station muttered, eyes locked on the screen. His hands trembled slightly, knuckles white against the console. "It's massive. But it's not solid. It's like..." A sudden jolt rocked the ship. The lights flickered. Static crackled over the comms. "Report." Kane barked, gripping the armrest of his chair. "Unknown gravitational anomaly, sir," another officer shouted. It's pulling at us." Kane turned his gaze back to the growing rift. The thing within it was no longer just shifting, it was pushing through. He could feel it now, not just through the sensors, but in the air itself. A pressure. Ike standing at the edge of a cliff, the vastness of the drop stretching beyond sight. Emergency thrusters, full burn. Kane ordered. "Get us out of range before." Another tremor. This time, something deep within the ship groaned, as if the Titanborn itself was resisting. Kane clenched his jaw. The Titanborn was one of humanity's greatest achievements, a vessel built to break the barriers of space, armed with the most advanced technology ever created. And yet right now, it felt impossibly small. The crew worked fast, voices overlapping in tense reports. Thrusters ignited. The ship pushed against the unseen force, engines roaring in protest. Then the ship's main lights dimmed for a heartbeat, and in that darkness, something unseen pressed against the edges of reality. The screens flickered, static, then bursts of distorted images, shapes that didn't make sense, glimpses of something massive, something ancient, something wrong. And then, just as fast as it had appeared, the vision was gone, leaving behind only the deep, unshakable certainty that they were not alone. "We're moving," the navigation officer shouted, breaking free of the anomaly. The ship lurched as the force lessened. The gravitational pull weakened. Kane exhaled, steadying himself. "Get us away from that thing." "Now," he ordered. The Titanborn surged forward, putting distance between itself and the growing tear in space. Kane didn't relax. He wouldn't, not yet. The comms officer turned to him, eyes wide. "Sir, we're picking up something else." "A signal. It's old." Kane frowned. "How old?" The officer hesitated. "Sir, it's using a transmission pattern that hasn't been seen for over 1,000 years." A chill ran through the bridge. Space was vast, but signals didn't last forever, not unless they were deliberately preserved. "Patch it through," Kane said. A burst of static filled the speakers. Then a voice, warped, distant, as if stretched across time itself. "Left open. We should never have." The transmission crackled, distorting. "If you receive this, leave. Leave now." The message cut off. Silence filled the bridge. Kane glanced at his officers. "Can we trace the source?" The comms officer shook his head. It's coming from all around us." Echoing. Kane didn't like that answer. He didn't like any of this. "Sir," the scanning officer called out, voice tight. "I think I know where we are." Kane turned sharply. "Explain." The officer swallowed hard. "The readings, they don't match any known system, but the background radiation, the star positions." "Sir, I think we're in a dead zone." Kane's brow furrowed. Dead zones, regions of space where no life, no stars, no planets existed. Empty voids where something had happened long ago, wiping entire systems from existence. The galaxy had plenty of uncharted space, but dead zones weren't just uncharted. They were avoided. "That's impossible," Kane said. "There was no dead zone near our destination. This wasn't where we were supposed to jump." The officer looked pale. "I don't think we jumped wrong, sir. I think we were sent here." A heavy silence settled over the bridge. The implications were terrifying. The Wormhole-Core was supposed to be humanity's greatest breakthrough, a way to open stable pathways through space. But if something had redirected them, if something had interfered with their jump, what's the status of our Wormhole-Core? Kane asked. The engineering officer hesitated. "It's functional, but there's a problem. The core's energy levels are fluctuating. It's like something is resonating with it, almost like." Another jolt. The ship trembled, as if something had reached out and brushed against its hull. "Proximity alert." Kane snapped his head toward the view screen. Outside, beyond the dark void, something was moving. At first, it looked like shifting light, a mirage in space. But then, slowly, the shape became clear. It wasn't a ship. It wasn't debris. It was something else, something massive. It loomed in the distance, its form shifting in ways that defied logic, as if it was both there and not. It had no clear structure, no recognizable design. It was simply present, a wrongness in the void. And then, without warning, it moved. Not forward, not sideways. It moved in a way that shouldn't have been possible, a flicker of displacement that made Kane's mind reel. One moment, it was far. The next, closer. And then the whispering started. Not over the comms, not through any known channel. The voices pressed into their minds, slipping between thoughts, wrapping around fears. Should not be here. Kane clenched his teeth, gripping the armrests of his chair. He had faced death before. He had commanded ships in battle. He had seen the horrors of war. But nothing had ever spoken to him like this. Ignore it, he ordered. Full power to shields. Get the core stabilized. We need to leave now. The crew fought to focus, hands moving across controls, faces pale with unease. The ship trembled again. On the screen, the anomaly pulsed, growing, shifting. And then, just for a moment, Kane saw something in its depths. A shape. No, many shapes. Things trapped within the tear. Things that had tried to cross before. Things that had failed. And one of them turned its head. It saw him. The whispering grew louder. No escape. Kane's pulse pounded. He had no idea what was happening, no idea what they had awakened. But one thing was clear. If they didn't leave soon, they wouldn't leave at all. The Titanborn trembled under the unseen force pressing against it. The thing outside the rift hadn't moved again. Not in any way the human mind could comprehend, but Kane could feel it watching. The whispering had slithered into every corner of the ship, an eerie presence lurking in the back of their thoughts, growing stronger with every passing second. The crew fought against it. Some clutched their heads, struggling to focus, their hands shaking over their consoles. Others muttered to themselves, as if trying to block out words that weren't theirs. But it wasn't just voices anymore. It was feelings. Dread. Panic. The weight of something ancient and hungry pressing down on them, dragging them toward the abyss. Status on the wormhole-core. Kane barked, trying to shake off the suffocating sensation gripping his mind. The chief engineer's voice came through, strained. Core's fluctuating. We're trying to stabilize it, but something is interfering with the energy flow. It's like it's being pulled apart from the inside. Kane clenched his jaw. He had seen this kind of fear before, men breaking under pressure, losing themselves to panic. He couldn't let that happen here. Not now. Keep working, he said. We don't leave unless that core is stable. The ship jolted again, this time hard enough to send crew members stumbling. Sparks burst from one of the overhead conduits. The emergency lighting flickered, bathing the bridge in a dim red glow. The whispering grew louder, crawling beneath their skin, seeping into their bones. Then the proximity alarm blared. "Sir," the scanning officer shouted. Its closer, Kane's gaze snapped to the view screen. The thing outside had moved again, though he hadn't seen it happen. It wasn't just looming in the distance anymore. It was right there. The rift behind it pulsed like a wounded beast, tendrils of darkness stretching outward, reaching, searching. And then something emerged. Not fully. Not yet. Just a glimpse, a piece of something vast. Something too large to be contained in normal space. A shape, shifting, twisting in ways the human eye couldn't follow. It wasn't a ship. It wasn't a creature. It was something else entirely. The whispering changed. It was no longer an unformed presence pressing into their minds. Now it had a shape, a voice, and it spoke directly to them. You were not meant to come here. Kane's blood ran cold. It wasn't a threat. It wasn't anger. It was a statement. A fact. You are small. You are fragile. And yet you tear open the veil like children playing with fire. The crew barely breathed. The thing wasn't just speaking. It was inside them, threading its voice through their thoughts, unraveling their sense of self. Kane forced himself to stand. Who? What are you? His voice was steady, but the weight in his chest grew heavier. For a moment, there was only silence. And then the thing moved again, not physically, but in a way that made every screen on the bridge distort. the air itself trembling. We are the Watchers. The word sent an unnatural chill through Kane's spine. You tear holes in what should remain whole. You call to things that should never hear your voice. You think you are explorers, pioneers, but you are only children knocking on doors you do not understand. The whispering grew sharp, piercing, like thousands of voices speaking at once. Kane's knees almost buckled under the weight of it, but he gritted his teeth and stayed upright. He had fought wars. He had seen death. But this was something else, something that didn't care about human weapons or tactics, and it wasn't alone. "Sir," the scanning officer said, barely above a whisper. "The rift, it's opening more." Kane turned to the screen. The tear in space stretched wider, its writhing edges peeling apart like a wound refusing to close, and beyond it, shapes, dozens, hundreds, moving, watching. "You are not the first to come here," the voice continued, curling around them like smoke. "You will not be the last, but none who enter leave whole." Kane's mind raced. They needed to go, now. He slammed the comm button. "Engineering, give me something." The chief engineer sounded frantic. "The core's resisting stabilization. Every time we balance the energy output, something pulls it back out of sync." Kane's fists clenched. The thing wasn't just watching them. It was holding them here. "Override the failsafes," he ordered. "Force a surge. We don't need stable. We just need enough." A pause. "Then, sir, that could burn out the drive completely. It won't matter if we're dead." Kane snapped. "Do it." The ship groaned as another wave of unseen pressure pressed against it. More sparks showered from overhead panels. The temperature dropped, frost creeping along the edges of the screens. Outside, the rift flared. Something was coming through. And this time, it wasn't just watching. It was reaching. Long, shifting tendrils of darkness stretched outward, curling through space like smoke twisting in zero gravity. They didn't move like physical objects. They moved like thoughts given shape. "You should not have come here." The screens flickered again, distorting. Except this time, it wasn't just static. It was faces, human faces, some familiar, some unknown, but all of them were screaming. Kane's breath caught in his throat. These weren't just images. These were memories, fragments of people who had come before them, people who had seen what they weren't meant to see. And then the lights died. Total darkness swallowed the bridge. Only the emergency panels flickered dimly, casting eerie, shifting shadows. The whispering pressed in, growing louder, until it wasn't whispering anymore. It was screaming. "You are not ready." The ship trembled violently. The hull groaned. Kane could feel something pressing against the walls, pushing inward, folding reality around them. Then, a blinding surge, a roar of energy as the wormhole core flared to life, pulsing like a dying star. The ship lurched. Kane barely had time to grab onto the railing before the Titanborn was yanked sideways, not through normal space, not through a place that could be charted. It was like being ripped out of something's grip. The whispering cut off. The pressure vanished. And then, silence. The screens flickered back to life. The alarms faded. The lights returned, casting sharp, artificial brightness over the bridge. Kane's breathing was ragged. He forced himself to look at the navigation console. The stars were different. The rift was gone. They were somewhere else. Somewhere new. But something wasn't right. Because as the comms flickered back online, a single transmission played through. Not a warning. Not a threat. But a whisper, soft and cold, curling through the static like a shadow that refused to leave. "You are not done." The whisper lingered in the air, curling through the ship's speakers in a faint, crackling echo. The words weren't just sound. They carried weight, pressing against the edges of reality, as if something was still reaching for them, still watching. Kane swallowed hard, his fingers tightening around the railing. The bridge was silent except for the faint hum of the ship's systems struggling to recalibrate. They had escaped, or at least that's what the sensors told them. "Confirm our location," he ordered, his voice steady despite the lingering dread in his chest. The navigation officer hesitated before responding. "Sir, I don't know where we are." Kane's head snapped toward the screen. The star map was a tangled mess of mismatched data, flickering between different sets of coordinates. They were nowhere. Everywhere. The system couldn't recognize a single celestial marker. "This isn't right," the officer whispered, frantically running recalibration checks. "We should be somewhere real." A sick feeling settled in Kane's gut. They had forced the jump. They had broken free. But the question no one wanted to ask was hanging thick in the air. Had they actually left? Or had they just gone deeper? The comms flickered again. Another whisper, softer this time. "You were not done." Then silence. Kane took a slow breath, forcing his mind to focus. Panic wouldn't get them anywhere. They had to work the problem. "Scan for any nearby objects," he said. "Planets, moons, debris, anything." The crew worked quickly, running scans, cross-referencing data. Every passing second felt stretched too thin, the ship unnervingly quiet despite the frantic calculations. Then a ping. "Sir," the scanning officer said, his voice laced with confusion. "I got something. A structure. Dead ahead." Kane's gaze locked onto the screen. A large, artificial object loomed in the distance, half buried in the void. It wasn't like anything they had seen before. Massive, jagged, like a shattered relic suspended in space. It pulsed faintly, its surface flickering between solid matter and something else, something wrong. But that wasn't what made Kane's blood run cold. It was the signal coming from inside it. A human distress beacon. The bridge fell silent. The implications hung in the air like static before a storm. Kane leaned forward, his jaw tightening. "How old is that signal?" The scanning officer hesitated. Then, in a barely audible whisper, "Sir, it's broadcasting in our own time frame." That wasn't possible. The only human ship to ever jump using a wormhole core was the Titanborn. The first jump. There shouldn't be anyone else out here. And yet, the beacon pulsed steadily. Someone, or something, was sending a distress call. Kane's stomach tightened. The whispering, the flickering memories of human faces, the warnings. They hadn't escaped. They had arrived. "Sir," a voice broke through the tense silence. "What are your orders?" Kane exhaled slowly. He knew what the logical answer was. Avoid the structure. Ignore the beacon. Focus on finding a way home. But logic had already failed them once. And if there was even the slightest chance that someone, something, was in there, waiting, watching, they had to know. Kane set his jaw. "Prepare a landing team." Nobody argued, maybe because they knew, deep down, that this wasn't a choice. It was something they had already been led to. The ship adjusted course, drifting toward the anomaly. The closer they got, the more the structure seemed to shift, its surface writhing like liquid metal caught in slow motion. It wasn't just an object. It was something alive, something reacting to their presence. Then the ship's lights flickered again, a short pulse, almost like a response. The whispering didn't return. But somehow, that made it worse. The Titanborn drifted closer to the structure, its hull groaning under the unseen pressure in the void. The distress signal pulsed steadily, an unnatural rhythm in the silence of space. No one spoke as the landing team prepared, the tension thick enough to feel like another force pressing against them. Kane stood at the airlock, helmet sealed, rifle strapped to his side. The team around him moved with the same quiet focus. There were no jokes, no last-minute reassurances. All felt it, the weight of something unseen, something waiting. The shuttle detached smoothly, cutting through the darkness as it approached the surface of the anomaly. Up close, the structure was even more unsettling. It wasn't made of metal or stone. It shifted, like a frozen wave caught mid-motion, its form warping in places, as though it couldn't decide what it was supposed to be. Then the distress signal changed. It wasn't just a beacon anymore. It was a voice. "You should not be here." The words crackled through their comms, threading through static, layered over 100 others, as if a chorus of voices were speaking as one. The shuttle shuddered, systems flickering, but they pressed on, closing in on what appeared to be an opening, an entrance carved into the shifting mass. The second the landing struts touched the surface, the whispering returned. This time, it was inside their helmets. Kane gritted his teeth, forcing himself to move. "Stay focused. We find the source of the signal, and we get out." The team moved in formation, stepping into the structure's entrance. Inside, the walls pulsed with a faint glow, as if light was bleeding through from another reality. It wasn't just a ship. It wasn't just a station. It was something else. A corridor stretched ahead, twisting in impossible angles, yet their feet found solid ground. Every step felt wrong, like walking through a dream where nothing was fully real. Then they saw it. Chamber at the heart of the structure, and in the center, a human body. Kane's breath caught. It was a man in a tattered flight suit, slumped against the wall. His face was obscured by his helmet, the visor cracked, his body unnaturally still. But that wasn't what made Kane's blood run cold. It was the patch on the suit. It was his name. One of the team members swore under their breath. "What the hell?" Kane stepped closer, his pulse pounding. The suit was identical to his. The insignia, the rank markings, every detail was exact. He hesitated, then reached out, fingers trembling. The second he touched the suit, the helmet snapped up. A face stared back at him. His own. But it wasn't alive. The skin was stretched too tight, the eyes dark and hollow, a mockery of what he was supposed to be. And then, the mouth moved. "You were never meant to leave." The chamber collapsed, or at least it felt like it did. The walls folded inward, space twisting, stretching, breaking. The team was yanked backward by an unseen force, reality itself unraveling. Kane gasped, trying to hold on, but the scene around him was no longer solid. Images flickered. Another version of himself, leading another team. Another Titanborn, drifting in the void, repeating the same mission. Time looping, bending, splintering. They had never been the first. They had never escaped. The whispering was deafening now, 1,000 echoes speaking the same terrible truth. You were not the first. You will not be the last. This is where you were always meant to be. The last thing Kane saw before the world shattered around him was himself, standing in the chamber, waiting for the next him to arrive. The void swallowed Kane whole. His breath caught in his chest as the sensation of falling gripped him, but there was no up or down, no direction, only the crushing weight of realization pressing in on all sides. The whispers had faded, yet their meaning lingered like an afterimage burned into his mind. This wasn't just a trap. It was a cycle, one that had been repeating long before he ever stepped onto the Titanborn. Then, just as suddenly as it began, the fall stopped. Kane found himself standing, his boots firm on solid ground. His breathing was heavy, ragged, his pulse hammering in his ears. The chamber was gone. The distorted walls, the impossible corridors, the flickering echoes of himself, gone. He was back on the bridge of the Titanborn. The quiet hum of the ship filled the air, the faint beeping of control panels and blinking lights giving the illusion of normalcy. His crew was there, staring at him with wide, uncertain eyes. "Captain." The voice was hesitant, as if afraid to disturb whatever fragile reality they had returned to. Kane swallowed hard, forcing himself to focus. His hands trembled as he looked around. The ship was intact. The scans on the monitor showed space stretching endlessly outside, the anomaly nowhere in sight. But the distress beacon, it was gone. His fingers hovered over the console, half expecting the same sequence of impossible coordinates to flicker back onto the screen. But the system displayed nothing unusual. No warping signatures, no fractures in reality. As if none of it had ever happened. Kane's pulse remained unsteady. He turned toward his crew. They were watching him, waiting for orders, but there was something behind their eyes. A flicker of recognition, of knowing. They had seen it too. Before he could speak, the navigation officer hesitated. "Sir, we're picking up Earth's signal again." Kane's breath hitched. Earth. For a moment, he couldn't believe it. They had been lost in the void, trapped in an impossible cycle, surrounded by whispers of themselves. But now, he turned to the comms officer, barely able to keep his voice steady. "Verify it." A pause. Then the officer nodded. "It's real, sir. We're home." Kane exhaled a breath he didn't realize he had been holding. The weight on his chest loosened slightly, but the tension in his mind remained. They had returned, but had they really escaped? The bridge crew moved quickly, adjusting their course, locking in coordinates. The familiar blue of Earth's signal pulsed steadily on the screen, a beacon pulling them back to the only place that had ever truly meant anything. Yet Kane couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. The ship's systems were intact, the timeline seemingly untouched. And yet, the memory of what he had seen, of the himself left behind, clawed at the edge of his thoughts. Had the cycle truly been broken, or had it simply reset? The ship's engines rumbled to life, pushing them forward. The familiar stars of their galaxy surrounded them now, a stark contrast to the warped abyss they had left behind. And yet Kane knew he would never be able to look at the universe the same way again. He turned to his crew, taking in their weary but determined faces. They had all survived something impossible, something they could never explain to anyone else. But they were here. They were human. And that meant they would keep moving forward, no matter the cost. As the Titanborn pushed toward home, Kane cast one last glance at the empty space behind them. It looked ordinary now, just a stretch of void like any other. But deep down, he knew the truth. Something had been waiting there. Something had seen them, and if the cycle had truly been broken, it wouldn't be the last time humanity reached into the unknown. This time, though, they would be ready.